Hey guys, this is Kyle and Adam at ProjectionHub, and we are back with another edition of what we like to call SBA Burning Questions. But here recently, we've been talking a lot more about, if you are the owner of an established business and you're thinking about selling your business someday, maybe that's in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and just trying to help people and share what we've learned and what we have experience with based upon, we work with a lot of people on the buy side. So people that are going through the process of, finding businesses they want to buy, putting together all their materials, going through the SBA loan application process, and how a lot of the things that determine whether they can buy a business or how much they're going to pay for that business are completely up to some of the decisions the seller makes as they approach that. So we've been gathering different questions and Reddit posts and different topics just to try to give some of that experience and shine a light on a little bit of that for people who own the businesses and want to sell them. And so today we have a pretty interesting Reddit post that I'm going to read to Adam here and kind of get his take on how he would advise this person if they were asking him that question. So yeah, here we go. What is a reasonable ballpark price for my business, or value is what they're looking for? 1.2 million in annual revenue over the average the past 4 years. 5 part-time employees, not including me and my partner. Me and my partner average about 30 hours a week on the business each. A smarter person could cover both our jobs in 40 hours. We're getting soft and less efficient as time goes on. Our combined AGI was 320K last year, but I get that's not my SDE. Shouldn't that be about the same? Which is around what I recall combining take home with what went into the high yield savings account and their IRA. It's e-commerce in a hobby space. We don't drop ship, but actually ship our products from one location. We own the building we're in, probably worth 650 to 750,000. Has a 20-year loan on it with 3 years of payments. Is it safe to assume any buyer would want the building as well? In these cases, does a buyer or seller get a better deal if the building is purchased with the business? 700 to 800,000 of inventory. Do we get to charge a premium on inventory? Does the buyer get a discount on what we paid for it? Almost everything could be run by the employees except payroll, accounting, and buying inventory. Me and my partner handle that stuff plus all the small details. Would we be worth more if it could run itself? AK, should I have moved an employee up to track inventory and make purchases from our suppliers? Out of our competitors, our brand is the nice people that are helpful. Does that brand goodwill add any value? We have tons of testimonials and positive posts about us. Some of the stuff we carry can be found on Amazon, but many folks don't trust the Amazon stuff. Most of our sales are B2B in terms of revenue, no customer facing brick and mortar, online only, but our location is on a retail strip. Would all of my growth ideas help me sell my business, or should I keep my mouth shut if a potential buyer came sniffing around? So ballpark, what would we be worth?
Yeah, tons of good questions. Yeah, tons of good questions in here. So I think I want to start with, you're probably going to get a multiple of your SDE or cash flow. And, I'm going to think about this from the way an SBA lender would look at this. So they are going to look at what your seller discretionary earnings or cash flow is or has been historically. And they're going to try to determine for the new buyer how much of that cash flow would be available for debt service. So, if you said, okay, there's 300,000 that's available for debt service, then you can back into, okay, well, how much of a loan could we afford based on having 300,000 available for debt service? And that's going to be different based on some caveats here. So one would be, how much does the buyer need to earn as a salary from the business themselves? Like, they need to take something out of the business to pay for themselves, probably, right? So that might take you from 300,000 of cash flow down to 200,000 of cash flow available for debt service. Now, the next thing to consider here is the building. So either the buyer is going to need to rent the building from you. If you could potentially sell the business and keep the building, and they would rent from you. That's going to also reduce the amount of cash flow available for debt service. Or they buy the building as part of the deal as well. One big trick there is if the purchase price of the building is 50% of the loan or more, then you get to put the whole loan on a 25-year term, which really spreads out those payments, and it helps that math of like how much can they afford. So just taking kind of back the napkin math, I'm thinking here, if you're wanting to do that, and you said the building's probably worth 650 to 750, you're probably 1.5 million is probably the ceiling then, right? Like on the total, because it's to your advantage, or it's to the buyer's advantage to be able to put the whole loan on a 25-year term. It helps their cash flow. So that'd be my gut reaction to your question here. Now, the next question of the 700 to 800,000 of inventory. We've talked about this in some other videos, but inventory is going to be something that the buyer assumes that they get as part of the purchase price. The inventory is what they need in order to produce the cash flow. So they're going to expect like a reasonable amount of inventory. I suppose if you had like 10 years worth of inventory or something, then probably what I've seen buyers do is then say like, this is the inventory we want and we'll pay you for this, but we're not going to pay you for this other inventory. And we may pay for it on a discount. If you have like a general, like if you, let's say you sell your inventory every month, like you sell through it every month, it's probably just going to be assumed as kind of part of the purchase price that the buyer gets like a normal operating level of inventory. So I wouldn't necessarily think of like getting the inventory above and beyond that getting paid for that above and beyond just the value of the multiple Vernians in the real estate. I'm going to stop there for a second. Yeah, if you have any feedback on that.
We recently just recorded a video that was interesting because you were talking about how a lot of people who are selling their business assume that there's, an SDE times a multiple that's reasonable for their business. And that's a good way to arrive at like what a realistic value is or sales price for the business. But then a lot of people think that they can take their equipment value and add it on top of that. When you kind of debunked that and said, well, you can't produce that kind of cash flow without the equipment. So you kind of have to do one or the other. It's either like an asset value sale or it's a cash flow multiple. And that's kind of determining the value. So like in this case, they talked roughly about, I don't think that they said specifically what the SDE was, but they said, roughly like a take home number there. And then they also talk about the value of the inventory. And they also talk about the value of the business. So I'm not saying you're contradicting what we had talked about, but like, does the building work a little differently in that case because it's a separate thing? I mean, that, you don't just get to throw inventory on top of that, because if you take the inventory out, that cash flow doesn't, like, that impacts the actual functionality of the business, whereas the real estate is, I guess, a little bit more nebulous than that.
Yeah, so the building is different than the equipment. It's very common to sell a business where the seller continues to just hold on to the real estate and just rent that out to the buyer. And so that's okay, but there's no free lunch. It's going to be kind of considered then in the cash flow, right? Like if you're not buying the building, well, then you're going to have to pay rent, which reduces your cash flow available for debt service. It's actually the same thing with the inventory. As I'm thinking about this a little bit more, you could, a buyer could say, we'll go ahead and pay you $700,000 for the inventory. But what that does is, okay, well, now that increases their loan amount. And at the end of the day, it's how much cash flow do they have available to cover their debt service? And if they just use $700,000 of the debt available to them to pay for the inventory, well, they're going to, that eats up some of that cash flow available for debt service. So it's all going to come back to cash flow, kind of no matter how you break down what they're paying for, like of the total purchase price, how much of it was for real estate, how much of it was for inventory, how much of it was for goodwill and the brand of the business and the customer list and all that. That's all could be, you could move that in whatever way you want, but at the end of the day, it's got a cash flow. Actually, I'm gonna pull this handy dandy little printout I have. So this tells me like what's a loan amount if you did a typical 10-year term. Typical SBA acquisition loans, if it excludes real estate, are in a 10-year term. And so what this shows me is how much cash flow is required. So if in this case we said 320,000 was the cash flow, but I'm going to take 100,000 off of that because the buyer needs to get paid a salary. So if we said there's 220,000 available with a 10-year SBA loan on a 10-year term, that would allow you to borrow 1.1 million. So
that doesn't leave room for the building, is your point, right? Like you add in the building on top of that, it's not going to cash flow because they're going to be above that price.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think basically what I'm saying there is exclude the building. If you don't buy the building, that amount of cash flow could support 1.1 million on a 10-year term. If you sell them the building, they could borrow more because you'd stretch out the loan payment. Right. So it'd be on a 25-year term. So you could probably, maybe it ends up being that amount of cash flow can support 1.7 instead of 1.1.
So if you were approaching this as, let's say you're representing the buyer in this deal, right? And when I say represent it, I mean like you're helping them find an SBA loan, put together projections, whatever. You're trying to help them figure out and make sure see if the deal pencils, basically. What's your order of operations going to be? Is it going to be, okay, first let's start with finding out really what SDE is. So like we want to find out purely like what cash flow of the business is and what that can support from a purchase price. And then depending upon how good that looks, you're going to start playing with, okay, is it possible to make the real estate work with this? Because then we get to stretch out the term. So then you're seeing what cash flow looks like with that. Then depending upon how that works, maybe you start looking at what is the inventory, how does inventory play into that? Like, are you going to kind of step through things like that just to like take it one? It's got to pass probably each test before you come back and you say like, yeah, if you really want this business, it would cash flow well enough for you to be able to get the building and like negotiate a little bit for inventory. Or you could say to them like, hey, look, if you want to try to buy this business, it's not going to work for you to pay a premium for inventory, and you're probably not going to be able to buy the business or the building based on the cash flow. Like, is that going to be kind of the steps you're taking through the buyer?
The first thing I do is just get all of the historical financials into a spreadsheet and see how it cash flows historically. And then we're going through any add backs that the seller is proposing. So if the seller says, yeah, I paid my personal health insurance on the business, that was $20,000 a year. And okay, we add that back. And I paid my personal cell phone bill and blah, blah, blah. Right. So you end up with, maybe some add backs. But then I'm going to say, okay, well, buyer, how much do you need to make as a salary? And that's a negative add back. And ultimately getting to that, what is the cash flow of this business going to look like in your specific circumstance as a buyer? Because every circumstance is going to be different. If I'm 25 and single and live in my parents' basement still, like I could live on $25,000 a year and be happy. And so that could be a buyer's situation potentially. Or if you've got 4 kids and you live in New York City, your cost of living's might be 10x. So that's so much of it depends on how much the buyer can actually borrow and pay for the business is going to depend so much on their particular circumstance, which is a little strange for a seller to understand. Like, what's your business worth? Well, it depends on who the buyer is to some extent. Different buyers are going to be able to secure different amounts of financing.
Yeah. And that, we could go, I think this is the whole point why we're starting to make some more content geared towards the seller. This exact conversation, because a lot of people that own a business, we've had experience working with them. It's almost like they view themselves a bit in a vacuum. It's like, I've done the work to build this thing and this is what it means to me. And on paper, this is what it means. And this is the value of things. But it does not work that way if all of the people trying to get your business can't afford it, or they can't get approved for the financing for it, or like there's just so many and like you just said, all of the buyers are going to be in different scenarios. They're going to have different personal strength. They're going to have different personal expenses. They're just all kinds of different things. So it's not that you have to reduce your price down to what every single person can afford. It's just, I think you have to be flexible in the fact that like you don't get to just look at your sell side of it, determine what the hard number is, and then put it out there and assume that's what everyone's gonna be able to pay for it, like, or anybody's gonna be able to pay for it. There's gonna have to be this expectation that you're gonna have an ideal price, but then you're gonna hear from people what they want to pay for it, and that shouldn't be a slap in the face. It's just like they're gonna find their bank's gonna tell them like, this is as much as you can borrow. Like, and at that point you can decide if you want to get creative with seller financing and all kinds of stuff like that to get to the value you want. It's just not quite as black and white when it comes to that process. So yeah, if you are out there and you're a person like this that has a business and you're starting to think about selling, you're like, what am I actually gonna be able to sell this thing for? It's not meant to be like a scare tactic to say like it's not worth what you think it is. It's just there's a nuance here. There's a process to go through, and it's better to start thinking about it today. So if you're out there, you own a business and you're starting to think about that, and you just want to run through a scenario like this with someone like Adam to be like, these are what my numbers look like. What can I realistically expect in 3 years from now? Feel free to reach out, support@ProjectionHub.com. Happy to give you some feedback, chat for free, and just give you some pointers there. So we appreciate you hanging out in this video, making it to the end at this point. If you like what you've heard so far, feel free to check out the rest of the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, and Hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.